James Carter walked quickly through the airport with his small black bag in one hand and his phone in the other, while his heart felt heavy, and his mind was full of worry, as always, because his little daughter Lily was sick again, and the hospital bills were growing every week, and his job at the repair shop barely covered the rent and food and medicine. He looked at the screen and saw her photo smiling, with her missing front teeth and soft eyes, and he smiled too, but it was a tired smile and one full of fear, because he didn't know how much longer he could keep going like this. He reached the gate just as they started boarding and found his seat near the back of the plane and put his bag in the overhead and sat down and closed his eyes for a moment to breathe and forget everything for a little while. The plane took off into the sky, and James tried to relax, even though he didn't like flying, and his back hurt from long days at work, and he missed his daughter more than anything, but he knew he had to stay strong. Across the aisle, a couple talked quietly, and a baby cried behind him, and in first class up front everything was quiet and peaceful, and the flight attendants smiled and served drinks, and people read books and watched movies. James looked out the window at the clouds and thought about the letter he had received last week from the doctor, saying Lily needed a new kind of treatment, and it was only available in Europe, and it cost more than James could ever earn in 5 years. He had cried that night when Lily was asleep, and he had no one to talk to and nothing left to sell, and he had never felt more alone in his life. Suddenly, a loud sound came from the front of the plane, and someone shouted, and everyone turned to look, and a man in a suit had fallen in the aisle, and was shaking and gasping for air, and people froze and stared, and the flight attendant called for help. James stood up fast, and moved past the seats as people stepped aside, and he knelt next to the man, and saw that his face was pale, and his lips were turning blue, and he wasn't breathing right. James told the flight attendant to get oxygen and called out for anyone with medical training, but no one answered and time was running out, so James began chest compressions the way he had learned years ago when he worked as an EMT before he gave it up to raise Lily alone. The man's chest moved up and down, and James kept going while sweat rolled down his face, and he counted each push and tried to stay calm even though the plane felt so small and the air so tight. People watched with wide eyes, and some recorded with phones, but no one else came forward, and James didn't care about anything except saving the life in front of him. After what felt like forever, the man gave a deep breath and coughed, and James helped him turn to the side as the oxygen mask was placed on his face, and the flight attendant thanked James over and over with tears in her eyes. James sat back against the wall and felt his heart pounding and his hands shaking, and someone handed him a bottle of water. But he didn't drink it, he just looked at the man, who was now breathing slowly with his eyes half open, and he wondered who he was, and why this moment felt like something more than just chance. The rest of the flight was quiet, and the man stayed in first class under watch, and James went back to his seat without saying a word, and no one clapped or cheered, and James didn't expect them to, because he didn't help for thanks. He helped because someone needed him, and he couldn't ignore that voice inside that said, do something now, before it's too late. When the plane landed, paramedics came on board and took the man away on a stretcher, and James gave his name and contact to a crew member just in case, and then he walked off the plane feeling tired, but calm, like maybe for the first time in a long time he had done something that truly mattered. He went home and hugged Lily tight and told her he loved her, and she smiled and said she missed him, and then she went back to her coloring book while James sat at the table and looked out the window thinking about the flight and the man and the strange feeling in his chest. He didn't know the man's name or what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. That moment on the plane had changed something deep inside him, and he could feel it, even if he didn't understand it yet. Something big had just begun, and his life would never be the same again. The next morning, James woke up early and made breakfast for Lily with one hand while scrolling through news on his phone with the other, because sleep had been short and his thoughts were racing all night about the man on the plane and the strange feeling that something important had happened. Lily coughed softly from the couch, wrapped in her favorite blanket, and James brought her toast and juice and kissed her forehead gently and smiled, even though his heart still felt heavy like a stone that never moved. While Lily watched cartoons, James sat on the old couch and turned on the news again, without really thinking, but something on the screen made him stop breathing for a second and leaning closer. The headline read, CEO Nathan Blake collapses on flight and is saved by quick-thinking passenger, and under it was a blurry photo taken on the plane, and James saw his own back in the image, kneeling beside the man with the suit and the oxygen mask. Nathan Blake, the name felt familiar, but James couldn't remember where he had heard it before, so he searched online, and within seconds he saw it all. Nathan Blake was one of the richest men in the country, the founder and CEO of a global tech company known for building schools and hospitals and giving millions to charity. He was powerful, respected, and never seen in public without security and cameras. James stared at the screen and felt like he had just stepped into someone else's life, because how could it be real that he had helped someone like that without knowing it, and what did it mean now? He shook his head and laughed softly to himself, because he didn't expect anything from it, not money, not fame, not even a thank you, because he did what anyone should do when someone needs help, and that was enough for him. But later that afternoon, while James was folding laundry and Lily was drawing quietly, there was a buzz from his phone, and the screen showed a block number, and for a moment James almost didn't answer, because he never trusted block calls. Still, something in his gut told him to pick up, and so he did, and said hello with a tired voice. The voice on the other end was deep, smooth, and calm, and it said, "Is this James Carter?" And James said, "Yes, who is this?" "This is Nathan Blake," the man said, and James sat down slowly on the couch as if his legs had lost strength, because he never imagined this call would come. Nathan spoke kindly and thanked James again and told him the doctors said he had only minutes left, and if not for James he would not be alive, and that he owed him more than words could ever say. James felt his throat tighten and said he was just glad the man was okay, and that he hoped he recovered soon, and Nathan paused before saying, "I want to meet you in person, I want to thank you properly, and maybe do something for you and your daughter if you'll let me." James didn't know what to say, because no one had ever offered him help like that, and his first instinct was to say no, to stay quiet, to move on. But when he looked over at Lily, who was coughing again, and trying not to cry, he knew he had to say yes. They agreed to meet in the city for lunch the next day at a quiet place near the park, and James didn't tell anyone, not even Lily, because he didn't want her to hope for something that might not come true. The next morning he wore his cleanest shirt and shaved and combed his hair and took a deep breath before walking into the restaurant, where a man in a gray suit stood up to greet him with a warm smile and a handshake. Nathan Blake looked stronger now, but still pale, and his eyes were kind and focused as he said thank you again and asked James to sit and talk. For the next hour, they spoke about life, about work, about raising kids alone, and James found himself opening up in ways he hadn't in years, because Nathan listened without judgment and seemed to understand the quiet struggles James carried every day. When James told him about Lily and her illness, Nathan became quiet and leaned forward and asked for details, and James told him everything, even the part about the treatment in Europe and the cost that was too high for him to ever pay. Nathan looked him in the eye and said, "I think I can help you," and James felt the room spin for a second, because he didn't know what those words really meant or if he should believe them. But something about the way Nathan said it made James feel like maybe, just maybe, this was real. Maybe that flight was not just luck or timing. Maybe it was something more. And maybe his daughter's future had just taken a turn he never saw coming. James sat by the window with a cup of warm tea in his hands, staring out at the gray sky, while the sound of Lily coughing softly in the next room filled the quiet space with a familiar sadness that never seemed to leave. He had not told her much about his meeting with Nathan, because he didn't want to give her hope that might break later, and he had learned that some dreams are too soft to carry the weight of real life. Still, he could not stop thinking about what Nathan had said in that small restaurant with the gentle music and the soft clink of glasses around them, when he looked James in the eye and said, "I think I can help you." James had heard promises before from neighbors, from social workers, from people with good hearts, but empty hands, so he nodded and smiled and kept his hopes low, because that was how he protected himself and his daughter from the sting of disappointment. But 2 days later, as James washed dishes after dinner and Lily sat on the floor building a tiny house from old blocks, the phone rang again, and this time the number was not blocked, but unknown, and James picked it up slowly, unsure what to expect. "Hello," said a voice that he recognized at once, and James straightened up a little as Nathan Blake spoke again and said, "I've been thinking a lot about you and your daughter, and I want to do something more than just say thank you." James said, "You already did more than enough by just calling me and being kind," but Nathan's voice stayed firm and steady and full of quiet power as he replied, "I want to cover your daughter's medical treatment, all of it, no matter what it costs." For a few long seconds James said nothing, because his breath had caught and his heart was racing, and the room around him seemed to blur like a dream that was too good to trust. He whispered, "Are you sure?" and Nathan said yes without pause, and then added, "I've already spoken to the hospital, and one of my team is calling the clinic in Europe tomorrow to begin the process." James leaned against the counter and pressed his hand to his face because he felt something inside him break open, something he had locked away for too long. Hope, real hope, the kind that makes your knees weak and your soul ache. He thanked Nathan again, and the man only said, "You did something for me. Now I want to do something for you and Lily, and that's how it should be." When the call ended, James walked to the living room and sat beside Lily, who was yawning with her head on his shoulder, and he held her close and whispered, "We're going on a trip soon, somewhere very far, but very special." And she asked why, with sleepy eyes, and he said, "Because someone gave us a chance." The next week moved fast like a wave that James had no choice but to ride as Nathan's team contacted doctors, arranged paperwork, and sent money to the right people without asking for anything in return. James received emails from people he didn't know telling him when to pack, when to fly, and what to bring, and he followed every instruction carefully with the fear that something might still go wrong. But nothing did. Soon James and Lily were on a plane again, this time together, holding hands and looking out the window as the clouds passed beneath them, and Lily whispered, "It looks like heaven," and James smiled with tears in his eyes, because that's how it felt too. When they landed in Switzerland, a nurse held a sign with their names and took them to a clean, quiet clinic surrounded by mountains and trees, and the staff there spoke gently and treated Lily like a princess and James like a hero. The doctors explained everything slowly, using words James could understand, and they said the new treatment was promising and safe and could bring real healing if her body responded well. James nodded and asked every question he could think of, because he had to be sure this was right, and the doctors answered with patience and kindness that made him believe they truly cared. That night in the small room at the clinic, Lily fell asleep quickly in her new bed, and James sat by the window again with the stars above him and the cold air against the glass, and he thought about how one moment on a plane had led him here. He thought about the stranger who became a lifeline, the call that changed everything, and the miracle that seemed to be unfolding before his tired eyes. James didn't know what the next days would bring, but for the first time in a long time, he believed they could bring something good. He looked at his sleeping daughter, her chest rising and falling softly, her fingers curled around her toy rabbit, and he whispered thank you to the night, to the sky, to the man who had seen him when no one else had. And somewhere far away, Nathan Blake was looking at his phone, reading a photo of Lily in her hospital gown, smiling at the camera, and he smiled too, because he knew this was only the beginning. The soft sound of rain tapped on the window as James sat beside Lily's hospital bed, holding her hand while machines beeped around them, and the nurses moved quietly through the hallway like shadows in a dream. Lily had finished her first round of treatment that morning, and now she was resting with her eyes closed and her mouth slightly open, and James watched her breathing like it was the most important thing in the world, because to him it was. He had never been in a place so clean, so calm, so far from home, and yet he felt strangely at peace because for the first time in years he was not fighting alone, and he could breathe without the weight of fear crushing his chest every second. The doctors had explained that the treatment would take time and patience, and that Lily's body would need to fight and heal slowly, but they were hopeful, and that one word was enough to keep James going every single day. He spent hours reading to her, telling her stories, and helping her eat even when the food made her feel sick, and she would smile through the pain, because she was strong, like her mother used to say before she passed away, when Lily was just a baby. James remembered those words every time he looked at Lily, and every time she squeezed his hand or whispered, "I love you, Daddy," and it gave him strength that no medicine ever could. One afternoon, as James walked through the hospital garden to clear his head, he got a message from Nathan, just checking in and asking how Lily was doing, and James replied with a photo of her drawing flowers with crayons, and Nathan wrote back with a heart emoji and a promise that he would come visit soon. James sat on the bench for a while listening to the birds and thinking about how strange life was, how a simple act on a plane had turned into a miracle that he never asked for, but needed more than anything. He knew he could never repay Nathan, not with money or words, but he told himself he would make this second chance count for Lily and for every parent who had ever felt powerless and afraid. Back in the room, Lily was awake and asked for her favorite story about the girl who found a golden feather in the forest. And James smiled and began to tell it with his hands moving and his voice soft, and Lily laughed at the same part she always did when the bird sneezed and the feather flew into the soup. Days passed and turned into weeks, and Lily's strength began to grow little by little. She walked a few steps, she ate more food, she laughed more often, and James kept track of every small win in a notebook he carried everywhere like a sacred journal. One day the head doctor came in with a file in her hands and a serious face, and James stood up, heart pounding, thinking something was wrong. But then the doctor smiled and said, "The treatment is working. We are seeing real change in her blood, and we are very pleased with her progress." James felt his knees weaken, and he had to sit down because the words hit him like a wave of light and warmth. And he held Lily and cried quietly into her hair while she asked, "Are you okay, Daddy?" And he said, "I'm just really, really happy, sweetheart." Later that evening, as the sun set over the snowy mountains, Nathan arrived at the clinic with a warm coat and a simple gift for Lily, a music box that played a soft tune when opened, and Lily loved it at once and asked him to sit with them and tell a story. Nathan looked a little awkward at first, but then he started a story about a giant who lost his way and found a small girl who helped him find his heart again. And James knew the story wasn't just a story, and Lily listened with wide eyes and hugged the music box close to her chest. After the story, James and Nathan sat outside with coffee in paper cups. And James said, "I don't know how to thank you." And Nathan replied, "You already did, when you didn't look the other way, when I needed help, and that's something I'll never forget." They talked like old friends, sharing moments of pain and truth and laughter. And for the first time, James felt like he wasn't just a man trying to survive, but a man who had a future and a purpose and people who believed in him. As the stars came out above them and Lily fell asleep with the music box beside her, James closed his eyes and whispered a quiet prayer, not for money or comfort, but for strength to keep going and to never waste this chance that life had given him. Because hope was no longer a distant dream. Hope was alive. Hope was breathing. Hope had a name. And her name was Lily. The snow outside the clinic melted slowly as spring came, and the air turned softer and warmer, and birds began to return singing in the trees around the building, while Lily stood near the window with her hands pressed to the glass, watching them fly. James stood behind her holding a blanket around her shoulders and smiling gently because this was something he thought he might never see again. Lily, standing on her own, watching the world with eyes full of light instead of pain. Each day brought something new, a step without help, a deeper laugh, a bigger bite of food. And James wrote every moment in his little notebook, filling the pages with memories that felt like small miracles, one after another. The doctors continued to check her blood and her scans, and each time they shared good news with calm faces and quiet voices, and James felt his heart grow lighter, like a heavy backpack slowly being lifted from his shoulders after years of walking uphill. Nathan called every week and sometimes sent small gifts like books and puzzles and warm socks with funny designs, and once he sent a video message from his office saying, "Hello, Lily, I'm proud of you," and Lily laughed and made James play 5 times in a row. The nurses in the clinic began to call her Sunshine because her smile was so bright and her drawings were all over the walls, colorful pictures of animals and castles and happy faces that made everyone stop and look for a moment when walking past. James spent every moment he could with her, reading stories, combing her hair, cooking simple meals in the little clinic kitchen, and once even dancing with her slowly to music from the old radio, just holding her hands and turning gently while she giggled and rested her head on his chest. One afternoon, the doctor came into the room with a soft smile and said, "We have something to show you," and she led James and Lily to the small office with a screen on the wall and images of Lily's body glowing with color. "This is progress," the doctor said with a proud voice. "This is what healing looks like," and James felt tears in his eyes as he looked at the pictures, because even though he didn't understand the science, he understood what it meant. It meant Lily was getting better. It meant the worst might finally be behind them. That night, James sat by the window again, holding the notebook and writing slowly, while Lily slept beside him with the music box, still playing its quiet song, and the stars blinking above the mountains like tiny lanterns. He thought about the plane the moment he stood up, the sound of the man falling, the panic, the weight of the decision, and how all of it led to this quiet room, and this peaceful night, and this miracle sleeping under the soft white blanket. He thought about the times he almost gave up, the nights when he held bills in his hand and cried alone, the days when he had to choose between gas and groceries, and the long hours at work that left him sore and broken. Now all of that felt like part of a bigger story, a path that led to something he never could have imagined, not even in his best dreams. Weeks passed, and Lily grew stronger, her voice louder, her steps steadier, and soon the doctors said she could spend more time outside and even take walks around the clinic garden, holding James's hand and pointing at flowers and clouds and butterflies. One morning Lily looked up at him and asked, "Daddy, when can we go home?" And James knelt beside her and smiled and said, "Soon, sweetheart, very soon." And in that moment he believed it with all his heart. Nathan visited again, and this time stayed longer, walking with James through the garden and sitting on the bench under the tree where Lily had hung her drawings from the branches like leaves of paper. He said, "I have something to ask you," and James turned with curious eyes, and Nathan continued, "I want you to work with me to help other families like yours, people who feel lost and scared and just need one person to believe in them." James didn't answer right away because the idea was big and new, but deep inside his heart something stirred, something that felt like purpose, something that felt like home. They watched Lily play near the fountain, her laughter filling the air like music, and James said, "I think I would like that." And Nathan smiled and nodded, as if he had already known what the answer would be. As the sun set that day, painting the sky with gold and pink, James sat with Lily on the bench and whispered, "We're almost there, sweetheart, almost home." And she leaned against him and closed her eyes. The journey was not over, but the worst was behind them, and ahead was a path full of light and hope and new beginnings. And James was ready to walk it, every step, side by side with Lily, forever. The plane touched down on the runway, and James looked out the window with Lily asleep on his shoulder, her small hand wrapped around his fingers, and her head resting against his chest as the wheels rumbled beneath them, and the sky outside turned orange with the setting sun. They were back home, back in the city they had left months ago, with nothing but a suitcase, a sick child, and a heart full of quiet fear. But now they returned with something more, something stronger, something real. They returned with hope. The airport looked the same, but everything felt different to James because he was not the same man who had walked through those doors before. He was still tired, still unsure of what the future would hold, but now he had a reason to keep walking forward without looking back. Lily woke up and looked out the window and whispered, "Are we home, Daddy?" And James smiled and kissed the top of her head and said, "Yes, sweetheart, we are." And she smiled too and reached for her bunny toy with the missing ear. They stepped outside into the cool evening air, and James felt the wind on his face and the noise of the city in his ears, and for the first time in a long time it felt good, it felt right, it felt like a new beginning. The next few weeks were busy and strange and beautiful as James helped Lily settle back into her little room with the drawings on the wall and the bookshelf full of bedtime stories, while he started working with Nathan's team, helping families who were walking the same hard road he had once walked alone. His new job was not easy, but it was meaningful, and every time he helped someone fill out a form or made a call or simply listened to their fears, he felt something grow inside his heart, something warm and strong and full of light. Nathan checked in often and sometimes visited with small gifts for Lily and ideas for James, and the two men became more than just friends. They became family, the kind you choose and trust and hold close without needing to say much at all. One morning James sat at the kitchen table with coffee in his hand and watched Lily pack her school bag by herself for the first time in years, and he smiled as she hummed a little song and placed her snack carefully in the front pocket. "Are you nervous?" he asked, and she shook her head and said, "A little, but I'm excited too." And James felt his chest swell with pride and love and wonder at how far she had come, from the girl in the hospital bed to the brave little warrior walking back into the world. At the school gate, James kissed her forehead and waved as she ran inside and turned around to wave back one more time with a big grin on her face. And he stood there for a while after she disappeared through the door, just breathing and smiling and feeling the world shift around him. Later that week, Nathan invited James to speak at a charity dinner filled with people in suits and dresses and bright lights and cameras, and James wore his best shirt and stood in front of a room full of strangers and told his story slowly, carefully, with a steady voice and open heart. He told them about the plane, the fear, the moment he stood up and helped a stranger without knowing who he was or what it would mean, and then he told them about Lily, her strength, her fight, her healing, and the second chance they were given. The room was silent as he spoke, and when he finished, people stood and clapped, and some even cried, and Nathan walked over and hugged him like a brother and whispered, "You did good, James, really good." That night, as James walked home under the stars with a soft breeze in the air and the sound of cars and laughter in the distance, he felt something deep and peaceful settle inside his soul, a quiet truth that could not be shaken. Life had changed forever, not because of money or fame or luck, but because of a choice, a moment of courage, a decision to help when no one else would. That choice had saved a life, and in return it had saved two more. James opened the door to their small apartment and found Lily fast asleep with a book in her hands and the music box on the table still playing its soft melody, and he sat beside her and watched her breathe for a while like he used to when everything was uncertain. He kissed her cheek and whispered thank you to the night, to the stars, to the sky, and to the man who had once been a stranger and had become something so much more. Because the flight that started it all was never just about saving someone. It was about finding something that had been lost for too long: hope, family, love, and the power of one moment to change everything forever.